Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Well, I'm going to read what happened at the Alamo that day, and that way we get a sense of what happened. March 20th, 1836. Gross retreat. Correspondent in the area. I sent you an uninteresting scroll under yesterday's date, not expecting to have an opportunity of writing to you again soon. But persons are continuing coming and going here. Some are very every day starting to the United States to men, raise men and money and provisions for the aid of Texas. May success attend their efforts. The members of the government are diligent in their new duties and they are likely to have enough to do. I have this day had an interesting treat. It was examination of Joe, the African American servant of the late Travis, Colonel Travis, who was in the Alamo when it was taken. He is about 22 years of age. He is the only male of all who were in the Alamo when attacked and then that escaped the death, according to his own account. Escaped narrowly. I heard him integrated in the presence of the cabinet. He related the affairs as far as known to him with much modest appearance, condor, and remarkable distance for one of his class. The following is, as nearly as I can recollect, the substance of his statements. You'll find in part of repetition of what has been already told, but it's correct. The previous statements in some points. The garrison was much exhausted by hard labor and intense watching and fighting for 13 days. The day and night precedes to the attack. The Mexican bombarded had been suspended on a Saturday night, March 5th. The little garrison had worked hard in repairing, strengthening their positions until late hours. And when the attack was made, which was just before daybreak, sentinels and all were asleep except the officers of the day, who was just starting on his rounds. There were three piquet guards without the fort, but they too, it is supposed, were asleep. Where we ran upon bayonets, for they gave no alarm that was heard. The first that Joe knew of it was the entrance, Adjutant Braw, that officer of the day, into Travis's quarters, who rose him, wake him up with a cry, "The Mexicans are coming." They were running full speed with their scaling ladders towards the fort and were under the guns and had their ladders against the wall before the garrison were arose to resistance. Travis sprung up and seizing his rifle and sword, called to Joe to take his guns and follow. He mounted the wall and called out to his men, "Come on, boys. The Mexicans are upon us, and we'll give them hell." He immediately fired his rifle. Joe followed him example. The fire was returned by several shots, and Travis fell, wounded within the wall, on the sloping ground that had recently been thrown up to strengthen the wall. There he sat, unable to rise, Joe seeing his master fall, and the Mexican coming over the wall and thinking with Falstaff that the better part of valor and decision run and concede himself in a house from the loophole of which he said he fired on them several times after they came in. Here Joe's narrate become somewhat interrupted, but Mrs. Dickerson, the wife of Lieutenant Dickerson, who was in the fort at that time and is now at San Felipe, has supplied some particular which Joe states of retirement prevent him from knowing with perfect accuracy the enemy of 3 times applied their scaling ladders to the wall. Twice they were beaten back, but numbers of discipline of prevail over the valor of despair. On the third attempt, they succeeded, and then they came over like sheep, as Travis sat wounded, but cheering his men where he first fell. General Mora, in passing, aimed a blow with his sword to dispatch him. Travis, rallying his failing strength, struck up the ascending weapon and ran his assailant through the body. This poor Travis lost enough. Both fell and spiral on the spot. The battle on became a couple melee. Every man fought for his own hand, with guns, gun butts, swords, pistols, and knives as the best could. The handful of Americans, not 150 affected men, retreated to such cover as they had and continued the battle until only one man, a little weakly body named Warner, was left alive. He and he alone asked for quarter. He was spared by a soldier, but on being conducted to Santa Ana, he ordered him to be shot, which was promptly done, so that not one white man of the devoted band was left to tell the tale. Crockett, the kind-hearted, brave Davy Crockett, and a few of the devoted friends who entered the fort with him were found laying together within 24 of the slain enemies around them. Bowie is said to have fired through the door of his room from his sick bed. He was found dead and mutilated where he had lain. The body of Travis, too, was pierced with many bayonets and stabbed. The typical Colonel Cause flashed his dastardly sword in the dead body. Indeed, Joe said the soldier continued to stab the fallen Americans until all possibility of life would not exist. Captain Bargan was the only Mexican officer who showed any depreciation to spare the Americans. He saved Joe and seized a poor Warner, but in vain. There were several African Americans and some Mexican women in the fort. They were all spared. Only of the African Americans were killed. A woman who was found laying dead between the two guns. Joe supposed she ran out in her fight and was killed by a chance shot. Now, Lieutenant Dickerson's child was not killed, as was first reported. The mother and the child were both spared and sent home. The wife of Dr. Ulrich and his sister, Melissa Noro, were all also spared, and restored to their father, who lived in Bajar. Bajar. Get off. After the fight, they were sword searched the house of an officer called Ensign, I think it was called. Are there any African Americans here? Joe emerged from his concealment and said, "Yes, here's one." Immediately, two soldiers attempt to dispatch him, one by discharging his piece at him, and the other by the thrust of his bayonet. He escaped with a scar only from his steel and one buckshot in his side, which, however, did little damage. He was saved by intervening of Captain Bargan, who beat off the soldiers with his sword. The work of death being complete, the Mexicans were formed in a hollow square, and Santa addressed them in a very immediate manner. They respond to with loud Vias. That's what it's called. Vias. Joe described him as a light-built, slender man, rather tall, sharp but handsome, and animated feature, dressed very plainly, somewhat like a Methodist preacher, to use the African American's own word. Joe was taken into Bajar and detained several days. He was shown a grand review of the army after the battle and was told there were 8,000 troops under arms. He supposed there were that many, but those acquainted with the ground in which he said they formed think that not more than half that number could be formed there. Santa Anna took much notice of him and questioned him about Texas and the state of the army. Among other things, he asked if there were many soldiers from the United States in the army and if more were expected. On being answered in an informal, he snarling said he had men enough to march to the city of Washington if he chance if he chooses. The slain were collected in a pail of bent bunt. Those gallant who devoted band of men sacrificed by the cold negligence, the corporate shameless negligence of their countrymen, who can read the stirring appeals and call for help from the despairing Travis, and the bitter reproach that the burst from him but the day or two before the massacre, without feeling the blood rush to his face with the shame for Texas, shame for the hundreds and thousands that might have gone up to the rescue, but they would not. The Texas will take honor to himself for the gallant defendants of Alamo, and will call it a second thermal, but it will be everlasting monument and a national disgrace. If my countrymen say he, on the third day of March, did not rally to my relief, I am determined to perish in the defense of this place, and my bones shall reproach my country for their negligence. Poor fellows, the immolation of thousands lives couldn't restore your gallant spirit or remove the stagnant that your sacrifice has left on the national uh, estimate. I can't how they got this. So I think estimate. In Pannon 2, he was called on by his brother in arms to come to the rescue. He had a choice. Body of some 500 men under him. He stated with 350 men, they would have saved the Alamo and might have destroyed the Mexican army, and they united with Travis. But after marching some distance, he called the council of officers and returned to the fortification Galilee. Gallo. Oh, God, I can't think, say it. Galilee, there you go, which he had been industrious strength and had been named Fort Defiance. How must he feel when he reads the letters of his fellow soldiers and learn his fate, and a fate which many shortly be his own? For if the Mexican army should now be direct against Galilee, oh God, I had it say Golad, there we go, and he be caught there, his situation will last be perilous. And if he receives Houston's order to blow up the fort and should do so in an attempt to march his small force from Golad to the Colorado, the chances are greatly against his success if the Mexicans have the officers that I think they have. They will cut up the dispatch in parchment. The situation of the country is dreadful. The odds seem greatly against her, but I do not despair the Republic. There has been a blink in mile upon her. She's greatly fallen from the high grounds she stood on the last December, but she will reciprocate. Houston may be a, a ghost. Oh, can't fall back. Obligate to fall back still further, but he only does it to return on the advancing foe with redouble forces. Many of the horrors of war long be averted from our beloved and happy Virginia. As snow storm commence, Bagar, Maine. That doesn't goes up to something else. So there's that part. Hold on, let me see here. There's another one somewhere. All right, let me get to another one here. Here's this one here. Late important from Texas. We've learned by the passengers of the schooner Comanches 8 days from Texas that the war has assumed a serious character on the 25th of February. The Texan garrison in Bexar of 158 men, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Travis, was attacked by the Advanced Division of General Santa, and considering of 2,000 men who were repulsive. with a loss of many killed, between 5,000 to 800 men, without the loss of one man of the Texan. About the same time, Colonel Johnson, with the party of 70 men, while recountering the westward San Pacoro, was surrounded in the night by a large body of Mexican troops. In the morning, the surrounding was made by the Mexican commander under unconditional, which was refused. But an officer of the surrendering was made as a prisoner of war, which was succeeded to be by the Mexican. But no sooner they had the Texans I can't read it, out of their quarters and stacked their arms, then a general fire opened upon them by whole Mexican force. The Texans attempt to escape, but the only three of them succeed. One of them, who were Colonel Johnson, between 25th of February and 2nd day of March. The Mexicans were employed in forming entrenchments around the Alamo and bombarding the place. On the 2nd March, Colonel Travis wrote that 200 shells had been thrown into the Alamo without injuring a man. On the 1st March, the garrison of the Alamo received reinforcements of 32 Texans from Gonzales, having forced their way through the enemy lines, making the number in the Alamo consisting 180 men. On the 6th day March, about midnight, the Alamo was assaulted by the whole Mexican army, commanded by Santa Anna in person. The battle was desperate until daylight, when only 7 men belonging to the Texan garrison were found alive, who cried for quarter, but were told that there was none for them. They then continued to fight until the whole bunch of them, our women, Miss Dickerson, and a African American for Colonel Travis, were the only persons who lived, lives were spared. We regret to say the Colonel David Crockett and his companion, Mr. Benton, and Colonel Bonham of South Carolina were among the number slain. Colonel Brody was murdered in his bed, sick and helpless. General Cos, on entering the fort, ordered the servants of Colonel Travis to point out the body of his master. He did when Cos drew his sword and mangled the face and limbs with, mangling feelings of Comanche savage. The bodies of the slain were thrown into the center of the Alamo and burned. The loss of the Mexican in the storming of the place was not less than 1,000 killed and mortally wounded, and as many wounded, making their loss with the first assault between 2,000 and 3,000 men. The flag used by the Mexican was a bloody red one in place of the constitutional flag. Immediately after capture, General Santa Anna sent Miss Dickerson and the servant to General Houston's camp, accompanied by the Mexican with the flag, who was the bearer of the note of Santa Anna, offering the Texan peace and general amnesty if they would lay down their arms and submit to his government. General Houston replied was, "True, sir, you have succeeded in killing some of our brave men, but the Texans are not yet conquered." The effect of the fall of Boxar throughout the Texas was electrical. Every man who could use a rifle and was in the condition to take the field much forward to the seat of war. It's believed that not lost than 4,000 riflemen were on their way to the army where Comanche sailed, determining the week their vengeance on the Mexican. General Houston had bent Gonzales and fallen back to on the Colorado with about 1,000 men. Colonel Fanning was in the fort of Golad, a very strong position, well supplied with ammunition and provision, with 400 to 500 men. All right, let's go to here. Let's see if it goes up here. The general determined of the people of Texas is to abandon all their occupation and pursuit of peace to remain in arms until every Mexican east of Rio del Nero shall be eliminated. Well, there you go. Here's some history. Hey, Louise, how you doing? Jason, glad to see you guys. So I'll read some more on this history. Hey, Mustang. So, hey, I'll read more. I'll find more on this Alamo and stuff. So I'm glad to see you, Louise and Mustang and Jason, and I'll talk to you guys all later. Bye now.